One afternoon, months later, he walked in again without warning. The bell above the door rang softly, just like before. A few heads turned. A few smiles appeared. No surprise, just recognition. The waitress waved from across the room. She was busy, but she didn't look rushed. Her movements were confident now. Her hands were steady. He took his usual booth by the window. The diner was full. Not loud, not chaotic. Full in a comfortable way. Families talked. A couple shared a plate. An older man read the paper near the counter. The man watched quietly, the same way he had on that first day. But this time his chest didn't feel tight. It felt calm. He noticed new details now. A worker helping another without being asked. A manager stepping in to carry plates. Someone laughing in the kitchen. Care had become normal. The waitress brought him coffee and set it down gently. She asked how he was doing. He said he was good. She asked if he needed anything else. He said no. She smiled and moved on. That simple exchange meant more to him than any speech ever could. Later that day, a young worker approached him during a quiet moment. The worker asked if it was true that he had built the diner. The man nodded. The worker said they heard stories about how things used to be, about the changes, about the night someone was finally told to go home and heal. The man listened. The worker said it made them feel safer working there. Man thanked them. He didn't say much else. He knew. Stories grow when they're passed on quietly, without being owned by one person. As the sun lowered outside, light poured through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The diner glowed in that familiar, golden way. He thought about all the times he almost didn't come back, all the excuses he could have made, all the moments that could have stayed broken if he chose comfort instead of responsibility. He realized something important. That broken hand did more than stop one person from working. It stopped him from looking away. When the dinner rush began, he paid his bill and stood up. He paused near the door and looked back one last time. The waitress caught his eye and nodded. No words were needed. He stepped outside into the evening air. The sounds of the diner continued behind him, life moving forward. People eating, people working, people being seen. He didn't know how long the diner would last. No one ever really does, but he knew this. As long as the people inside mattered, the place would matter too. He walked to his car slowly, not in a hurry to leave, not in a hurry to stay, just content. He had entered his diner as a stranger. He stayed long enough to remember why he was never meant to be one. The diner faced its first real test. Not long after things had settled, it started on an ordinary morning. The sky was gray. The air felt heavy, the kind of day that usually stayed quiet until noon. The man was not there when it happened. A delivery truck arrived late. When it finally pulled in, the driver explained there had been a problem at the warehouse. Half the usual supplies were missing. No fresh bread. Limited produce. Fewer meats. The staff gathered near the counter, unsure what to do. Before this would have turned into panic. Raised voices. Blame passed from one person to another. This time it didn't. The acting manager took a breath and asked for ideas. Someone suggested adjusting the menu for the day. Another offered to call nearby suppliers. Someone else volunteered to explain the situation to customers honestly. They worked it out together. When the doors opened, a small sign was placed near the entrance. It explained that some items were unavailable and thanked customers for understanding. Most people nodded and took seats anyway. A few complained, but calmly. A few left, but many stayed. The waitress moved through the room with quiet confidence. She explained the changes with a steady voice. No fear. No rushing. Customers listened. One older woman smiled and said, "It was nice to be told the truth," by midday. The diner was full. The man arrived just after lunch began. He stepped inside and immediately sensed something was different, not wrong, strong. He watched the team move together like a well-worn machine. Not perfect, but aligned. The waitress noticed him and gave a small wave before returning to a table. He sat and observed. The way he always did, a customer raised a concern about a missing menu item. The waitress explained. The customer nodded and chose something else. No tension, no apologies that felt like fear. Just conversation. The man felt a quiet smile form. Later, during a slow moment, the staff gathered briefly near the counter. They talked through what worked and what didn't. They laughed about one mistake and corrected it for the next. Rush, the man, didn't interrupt. He realized then that the diner no longer needed him standing nearby to keep its balance. That was the true measure of healing. In the afternoon, the waitress sat with him for a moment, like she sometimes did now. She told him the day had been stressful, but different, she said before. Stress felt lonely now. It felt shared. The man nodded. He told her that was how work was meant to feel. As the sun broke through the clouds, light filled the diner. The radio played softly. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the room. The man finished his drink, stood to leave, before he reached the door. He turned back and looked at the place. One more time, people were talking. People were helping. People were working without fear. He stepped outside. Feeling lighter than he had in years, the diner carried on behind him, not because he was there, but because the people inside had learned how to care for one another, and that, he knew, would last longer than any name on a wall. The diner had found its balance. But life has a way of testing balance when it starts to feel comfortable. It began with small signs. A slower morning than usual. A few empty tables that normally filled quickly. The kind of change most people ignore at first. The man noticed he came in on a weekday morning, earlier than usual. The bell rang softly, and the familiar smells wrapped around him. Coffee, warm bread, cleaning soap still lingering from the night before. The waitress was already there, setting up the counter. She moved with ease now. No cast, no hesitation. Just steady hands and calm steps. She smiled when she saw him and poured coffee without asking. He thanked her and sat in his usual booth. A quiet tension rested in the room. Not fear, not panic. More like a shared question no one had spoken yet. By mid-morning, it became clear. Fewer customers were coming in. Those who did stayed shorter than usual. Some mentioned rising prices everywhere. Others said they were cutting back. The staff noticed too. Before, this kind of day would have filled the room with worry. Whispers about hours getting cut. Silent fear about being blamed. Now, something different happened. During a slow moment, the acting manager gathered everyone near the counter. No raised voice. No rushed tone. They talked. They talked about ideas. Simple ones. A smaller special for the day. A handwritten note near the door welcoming people in, offering half portions for those who wanted them. No one laughed at the ideas. No, one shut them down. They tried. The waitress suggested checking in with regulars, asking how they were doing instead of just taking orders. Another worker offered to adjust preps so nothing went to waste. The man listened from his booth, quiet and still. This was the diner learning how to breathe on its own. When customers came in, they were greeted with honesty. No pressure. No pretending. Some smiled and stayed longer. One older man said he appreciated being treated like a person, not a wallet. The room slowly warmed. The man felt a familiar feeling in his chest. Not pride. Something softer. Gratitude. Later that afternoon, a problem arose. A piece of kitchen equipment failed without warning. Nothing dangerous. Just inconvenient before, this would have meant stress and shouting. Instead, someone unplugged it. Someone else adjusted the menu again. The waitress calmly explained. Delays to customers. No one stormed out. People waited. The man stood up and offered to help clean while things slowed. No one questioned it. They handed him a towel like it was the most normal thing in the world. As he wiped the counter, he remembered the early years, the long nights, the mistakes, The lessons learned the hard way. Back then, he thought strength meant endurance. Now he knew it meant care. In the late afternoon, the diner filled again. Not all at once. Slowly, steadily, laughter returned. Cups refilled. Plates emptied. The waitress paused near his table during a quiet moment. She said she had been thinking about that first day. The day he came in as a stranger. She said she almost didn't come to work that morning. Her hand hurt. Her heart was tired. He listened. She said if things hadn't changed, she would have left the job. Maybe the town now. She felt rooted. The man nodded. He told her places survive because of people who stay long enough to shape them. As evening approached, the sky outside turned soft and orange. Light spilled through the windows and rested on the tables. The diner looked alive, not flashied alive. The man paid his bill and stood by the door for a moment. He watched the staff move, calm, connected. This was not luck. This was choice. He stepped outside and breathed in the cool air. Behind him, the diner continued, not perfect, but human, and that was enough. The bell above the diner door made a soft sound as the man stepped inside. It was early afternoon, the quiet time between lunch and dinner. The smell of coffee, oil, and grilled onions filled the air exactly as it had many years ago. For a moment he stood still, letting the feeling settle in his chest. No one looked up. That was fine. That was the point. He chose a seat near the window, one of the old booths with cracked red leather. He ran his fingers along the edge of the table. The surface was worn smooth by thousands of meals, countless conversations, and years of work. This place had once been his whole world. Now he was just another customer. The diner was not fancy. It never had been. But it was supposed to be warm, honest, and fair. That was how he built it. He remembered the first day it opened, when the floor still smelled like fresh wood and the sign outside had not yet faded. Back then, he worked every role himself. He cooked, cleaned, fixed broken chairs, and stayed late to mop the floors. He believed that if you treated people right, they would treat the place right too. Life had moved on since those days. Opportunities came, then bigger ones. He stepped back, handed control to others, and trusted that the values he planted would remain. He told himself that good systems last even when the founder leaves. Today, he was here to see if that was true. A tired-looking server walked past his table without noticing him. Her apron had a coffee stain. Another employee leaned against the counter, scrolling on a phone, ignoring the empty cups piling up. The man watched quietly, his face calm, but his eyes alert. He was not here to judge too quickly. One slow moment did not tell the whole story. He picked up the menu. It was thinner than he remembered. Some items were gone. Prices were higher, but portions looked smaller on the photos taped to the wall. He closed the menu and looked around instead. The windows were dusty. The corner plant was dry and leaning. Small details, maybe. But small details often spoke the loudest. A customer at the counter cleared his throat loudly, waiting for attention. No one responded right away. When someone finally did, it was without a smile. The man felt a quiet tightening in his chest. This place used to feel alive. Even on slow days, he reminded himself to stay neutral. He had not come to stir trouble. He had come to observe. He ordered a simple coffee when a server finally reached his table. Her voice was polite but rushed. She didn't make eye contact. She wrote nothing down, as if already overwhelmed. As he waited, his mind drifted back to the past. He remembered hiring people who needed a second chance. Single parents, students, folks who had fallen on hard times. He made sure schedules were fair and breaks were real, not because it looked good, but because it was right. The coffee arrived, lukewarm. He took a sip anyway. The taste was familiar, though weaker than before. He set the cup down and watched the flow of the room. The diner still had customers, but something felt off. The energy was thin, like a place running on habit instead of heart. Near the kitchen door, he noticed a waitress struggling with a tray. Her movements were careful, uneven. One of her hands was wrapped in a thick, worn cast that had clearly seen better days. The cast was gray at the edges, held together with tape that had been replaced more than once. She tried to balance plates with one hand, while steadying them against her body. It was not graceful. It was painful to watch. Still, she moved quickly, her face tight with focus. When a plate slid slightly, she caught it just in time. Biting her lip to keep from reacting, the man leaned back slightly, watching her cross the room. No one stepped in to help her. Others walked past as if this was normal. He felt a small spark of concern turn into something heavier. She reached a table and apologized for the wait before anyone complained. Her voice was soft but steady. She placed the plates down carefully, then moved on, already scanning the room for the next task. The cast bumped against the edge of a chair, and she flinched. Just for a second, he looked toward the counter, expecting a manager to notice. Someone had to see this. Someone had to say something. But the person behind the register was busy counting receipts, head down, as away from the floor. The man's coffee grew cold as he watched the waitress make another round. She moved slower now. Sweat had formed near her hairline. Still, she didn't stop. He thought about rules, about safety, about care. A diner is not just a place to eat. It is a workplace. People get hurt here if corners are cut. He knew that better than anyone. A memory surfaced of an old employee who once burned his arm badly. Back then, the man shut the kitchen down for the day. Lost money. Angry customers. But the worker healed, and the team learned that health came first. He looked again at the waitress's hand. That was not a fresh injury. That was someone pushed to keep going long after she should have been resting. The man shifted in his seat. This visit was already becoming more than he planned. He had expected small issues. Not this. A plate clattered somewhere behind him. No one yelled, but the sound drew a few looks. The waitress hurried over to clean it, even though it wasn't her mistake. She knelt down slowly, awkwardly, using her good hand to pick up pieces. The man felt a quiet ache behind his eyes. This place had once protected its people. Now it seemed to be draining them. He finished his coffee and stayed seated. He wasn't ready to leave, not yet. He needed to understand more. He needed to see if this was a rare moment or part of something deeper. The diner hummed softly around him. Forks scraped plates. A radio played low in the background. Life went on, unaware that someone who once gave everything to this place was sitting silently, watching it change. And as the waitress passed his table again, favoring one side, trying not to show pain, he realized something important. He had walked in as a stranger, but he would not be leaving. Same way. The man stayed in his booth long after he finished his coffee. He watched the door open and close as customers came and went. Some looked satisfied. Others left without finishing their meals. The staff moved fast, but not smoothly. Everything felt rushed, like they were always one step behind. The waitress with the cast passed by again, slower this time. Her shoulders were tight, and she kept her injured hand close to her body, as if trying to protect it from the world. When she reached the counter, she paused and took a quiet breath before turning back toward the tables. The man noticed small things most people missed. How she adjusted plates using her arm instead of her hand. How she leaned slightly to one side to avoid pressure. How she smiled even when her eyes looked tired. This was not someone trying to gain sympathy. This was someone trying to survive the day. A couple near the window waved for service. The waitress hurried over, even though another server was closer. She apologized again, out of habit, out of fear maybe. The couple nodded but didn't seem angry. Still, she rushed back to the kitchen like time itself was chasing her. The man stood up and slowly walked toward the counter. From here, he could hear pieces of conversation. Complaints about shifts. Someone asking for a day off next week. Another voice responding with a short, sharp no. There was no warmth in it. He leaned against the counter and pretended to check his phone, listening without being obvious. He heard the waitress speak quietly to another worker. She said her hand had been hurting more than usual. The other worker told her to push through, that management wouldn't like excuses. That word stayed with him. Excuses. He stepped back and returned to his seat. His chest felt heavier now. This was no longer about dusty windows or thin menus. This was about people being treated like tools instead of humans. The waitress walked past again. Carrying a tray that looked too heavy for one person, let alone someone injured, the man stood halfway from his seat, almost stepping in to help. He stopped himself. He wasn't ready to be seen yet. She made it to the table, but not without pain. Her face tightened as she lowered the tray. One plate slipped slightly. She caught it, but the sudden movement made her gasp. She turned away quickly, hoping no one noticed. The man noticed. When she came to his table again, he spoke gently, careful not to sound like someone prying. He asked how her day was going. She paused, surprised by the question. Most customers didn't ask that. She said it was fine. Busy, but fine. Her voice carried that tired tone people use when they don't want to explain. He nodded, then asked about her hand, as if just noticing it. He kept his voice calm, friendly, not demanding. For a moment she hesitated. Then she shrugged and said she had broken it a while back. She said it like it was no big deal, like something that had already been decided and couldn't be changed. He asked if she was supposed to be working with it. She gave a small, careful smile and said she didn't really have a choice. Bills don't wait, she said. Rent doesn't pause. She said it quickly, like she had said it many times before. The man felt something tighten in his chest. He asked if she had asked for time off. She looked toward the counter before answering. She said she tried. She said they were short-staffed. She said she didn't want to cause problems. That word again, problems. She apologized for talking so much and asked if he needed anything else. Before he could answer, someone called her name sharply from the kitchen. She flinched, then hurried away. The man sat back down, his mind racing. He thought about responsibility, about ownership, about what it really meant to step away from something you built. He had trusted systems, trusted people, trusted that kindness would carry on without him standing there to enforce it. Sitting in that booth, he realized trust without follow-up can turn into neglect. The diner continued its slow rhythm. Plates clinked. Orders were called. The waitress moved through it all like someone balancing on a thin line. A man at another table raised his voice about cold food. The waitress apologized even though she hadn't cooked it. She offered to replace it. When she turned away, her shoulders dropped for just a second. The man followed her with his eyes. He noticed the manager finally step out, but only to speak to the upset customer. The tone was sharp, defensive. No apology for the delay. No concern for the staff. The customer left soon after, shaking his head. The manager didn't look at the waitress. Didn't ask if she was okay. Just returned to the register. The man felt a quiet anger settle in. Not loud, not explosive. The kind that comes from disappointment. He thought about all the speeches he had given years ago about dignity at work, about respect being non-negotiable. Watching this unfold felt like watching those words fade off a wall. The waitress passed by again. Her cast brushed against the edge of the counter. She winced, then forced herself upright. No one said anything. The man realized then that staying silent made him part of the problem. He didn't need to reveal who he was yet. But he couldn't ignore what he was seeing either. He stood up and walked toward the counter again, this time more directly. He waited until the rush eased, then spoke to the person behind the register. He asked a simple question. He asked if it was normal for employees to work injured. The response was quick and dismissive. People call in sick all the time, the manager said. If everyone stayed home for every little thing, the place would shut down. The man nodded slowly. He asked if broken bones counted as little things. The manager frowned and said everyone has a story. Everyone has problems. Work is work. That was the moment the man knew. This was deeper than one bad day. He thanked the manager for the time and returned to his booth. His decision was forming piece by piece. Not emotional. Not rushed. But firm. As the afternoon light shifted through the dusty windows, the waitress finished another round of tables. Her steps were slower now, her energy almost gone. The man watched her carefully. He had come in as a stranger to observe. Now he was staying to act, and what he chose to do next would change far more than one shift at a small diner. The man did not leave after that conversation. He stayed where he was, sitting quietly, watching the room like someone trying to understand a language he once spoke fluently, but had not practiced in years. The diner felt louder now, even though the number of customers had dropped. Every sound seemed sharper. Every small moment felt heavier. The waitress with the cast went into the back for a few minutes. When she came out, her face looked more tired than before. She wiped her hands on her apron and picked up another order slip. No pause. No rest. The man noticed how she avoided using her injured hand as much as possible. She had learned new ways to do old tasks, sliding plates instead of lifting them, using her elbow to push doors open, holding pain inside so it would not slow her down. This was not strength, he thought. This was pressure. He stood up and walked toward the window, pretending to stretch his legs. From there, he could see the parking lot. A few cars. An old delivery truck with faded paint. He remembered buying the first truck himself, driving it at dawn to pick up supplies because he could not yet afford help. Back then, if someone was hurt, they stayed home. The work waited or he covered it himself. It cost money, but it saved trust. He turned back toward the room. The waitress was helping an older couple near the door. She leaned down slightly so they could hear her better. Her cast bumped the edge of the table again. She froze for half a second, then kept talking. Her voice steady. The man felt his jaw tighten. When the couple left, they thanked her warmly. She smiled, real this time. For a moment, the tired look lifted. Moments like that mattered. They were why people stayed in jobs that hurt them. The man returned to his booth, but he did not sit right away. He rested his hands on the table and looked around, counting faces. These people were not lazy. They were not careless. They were worn down. He saw a young worker scrubbing the counter with quick, angry motions. Another standing near the kitchen door, staring at the floor while waiting for instructions that never came. Leadership, he thought, is not about being loud. It is about being present. The waitress came back to his table. She asked if he wanted anything else. Her voice was softer now, almost unsure. He asked if she had eaten today. The question caught her off guard. She laughed quietly and said, "Not yet. Maybe later if it slowed down." He looked at the clock on the wall. It was already past mid-afternoon. He asked how long her shift was. She hesitated, then said she was closing. Her eyes flicked toward the counter again, like she was checking for permission even in conversation. He nodded slowly. He thanked her and said he would like to order something simple. Not because he was hungry, but because it gave her a reason to pause. When she left, he stayed seated. Thinking, he thought about what ownership really meant. Papers, shares, control. None of it mattered if the people inside the building felt invisible. He had once believed that stepping away was a sign of success. That if a place could run without him, it meant he had done something right. Now he saw the cost of absence. The food arrived a few minutes later. She placed it down carefully, using one hand. Her breathing was shallow. He thanked her and told her to take her time. She smiled, but the words did not change her pace. Habits like that are hard to break. He ate slowly, watching the light outside fade just a little. The diner lights flickered on automatically. The room took on a dull yellow glow. The manager stepped out again and spoke to the staff about the evening rush. The tone was firm, impatient. No questions asked. No space for answers. The waitress nodded along with the others. Even though she was standing slightly apart, leaning against the counter for support, the man felt a decision settle in his chest. He finished his meal. Whether we're under all in bed with the what anymore. When dining with anywhere run and dad or I'm down when not to show off. Just enough to say, I see you, as he stood to leave the booth. He noticed the waitress struggling to open the heavy back door while carrying trash. Without thinking, he stepped forward and held it open. She looked surprised, then relieved. She thanked him quietly. He told her she should not be lifting heavy things with her hand like that. She smiled again, the careful smile, and said someone had to do it. That answer stayed with him as he walked. Back to his seat, someone always does. The afternoon slid toward evening. More customers came in. The pace picked up again. The waitress moved faster, despite the pain. The cast was now slightly smudged with grease. The man watched closely, no longer just observing, but preparing. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket. He had not planned to use it, but now he wrote things down. Times, words, reactions, not to punish, but to understand. He wrote about the way the manager spoke, about the way staff avoided eye contact, about the waitress who never complained out loud. This was not about one broken hand anymore. It was about a broken system. Near the end of the rush, the waitress stumbled slightly near the counter. She caught herself, but the movement sent a sharp pain through her arm. She closed her eyes for a brief second. The man stood up immediately, his chair scraping softly against the floor. A few people looked over. He asked if she was okay. She said yes too quickly. The manager looked over. Annoyed by the interruption, the man met that look and held it. Calm, steady. In that moment, he knew the next step would not be quiet. The time for watching was almost over. He had entered as a stranger, but soon everyone in that diner would understand why he was there. The evening rush settled in like a wave that refused to slow down. The diner filled with voices, the scrape of chairs, the steady call of orders from the kitchen. The man stood near the counter, blending into the movement. Listening more than speaking, the waitress with the cast moved carefully between tables. Her steps were shorter now. She leaned against surfaces whenever she could, just for a second, just enough to breathe. Still, she kept going. When someone thanked her, she nodded. When someone complained, she apologized. The man watched the pattern repeat. Pain, work, silence. He waited for the right moment. Not when tempers were high. Not when plates were flying. He waited until the rush eased, till the room took a short breath. That moment came when the clock ticked past dinner hour and the crowd thinned. A few customers lingered over coffee. The radio hummed low. The waitress stood near the counter, rubbing her shoulder with her good hand. The man stepped forward. He asked to speak with the manager. His voice was calm, steady, not loud enough to draw attention from the room. The manager looked up, clearly annoyed, but nodded and stepped aside. They stood near the back, close enough to hear the kitchen, but far enough to talk. The man began with simple questions. How long the diner had been short-staffed, how injuries were handled, what the policy was for medical leave. The manager answered quickly, defensively. Said people called out too much. Said business was hard. Said everyone had to pull their weight. The man listened without interrupting. Then he asked about the waitress. The manager sighed and said she was a hard worker. Said she insisted on coming in. Said no one forced her. The man nodded slowly. He asked if the manager had seen her hand. The manager said of course. He asked if the manager would carry hot plates all day with a broken bone. There was a pause. The manager's face tightened. He said it wasn't personal. Said it was just how things worked. That was when the man spoke again, softer now. He said systems don't excuse harm. He said survival mode should never be the standard. The manager frowned and asked who he was to say that. The man took a breath. He told the truth. He said he was the one who built the place. He said his name was still on the paperwork, even if it wasn't on the wall. He said he still had a say. The words landed heavy. The manager laughed once, short and unsure, then stopped when he realized the man wasn't joking. Around them, the room seemed too quiet, even though no one was officially listening. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply spoke about what he had seen. About the broken hand. About the fear of asking for help. About the way respect had faded. The manager tried to explain. Tried to shift blame. Tried to talk about numbers. The man stopped him. He said, "Numbers never mattered. It's more than people." He asked the manager to call the waitress over. She approached, slowly, confused, worried she was in trouble. Her eyes flicked between the two men. The man asked her to tell the truth. He told her she would not be punished for it. She hesitated. Years of habit held her back. Then she spoke. She said her hand had been broken for weeks. She said it hadn't healed because she never rested it. She said she asked for time off once and was told to manage. Her voice shook. But she kept going. She said she liked her job. Said she liked the customers. Said she just needed time to heal. The manager looked away. The man listened without interrupting. When she finished, he thanked her. He told her she had done nothing wrong. He turned back to the manager. He said this ended tonight. He said the waitress was going home. Paid he. Said she would see a doctor the next day. Paid. He said her job would be waiting for her when she was. Healed. The manager started to argue. The man raised his hand. He said, if the manager couldn't support that, he couldn't stay. Silence stretched between them. The manager nodded. The man turned to the waitress and told her to clock out. She didn't move at first. He repeated it. Kindly, her eyes filled with tears, she quickly wiped away. She removed her apron with shaking hands. Other staff watched quietly. No one spoke. The man walked the waitress to the door. He told her to rest. He told her she mattered. She thanked him again and again. When she left, the man returned to the counter. He gathered the remaining staff. He spoke simply. He said things were going to change. He said injuries would be taken seriously. He said respect was not optional. Some nodded. Some looked unsure. Some looked relieved. The man stayed until closing. He helped stack chairs. He wiped tables. He locked the door himself. As the lights dimmed, he stood alone in the quiet diner. The place felt different. Already, not fixed, but healing. And he knew the final choice he would make next would decide the future of everything he built. The diner felt different the next morning. The man arrived early. Before the sun fully rose, the parking lot was empty, quiet, except for a single bird perched on the faded sign. He unlocked the door himself and stepped inside. The air was still clean in a way it hadn't been the day before. He stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. No orders being called, no plates clinking, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. This was how it all began. Years ago, he walked through the diner slowly. He straightened chairs. He wiped the counter with steady hands. Each small action felt like an apology to the place. And to the people who had carried it when he wasn't there, staff began to arrive one by one. They looked surprised to see him already working. Some nodded. Some smiled carefully, unsure what the day would bring. He greeted each person by looking them in the eye. When the manager arrived, the man asked to speak privately. There was no anger in his voice, just firmness. He explained that leadership required care, not control. He said the diner needed someone who protected people, not just profit. He thanked the manager for the work done, but made it clear that the role was ending. There was tension. There were words exchanged, but there was no shouting. The manager left. The man gathered the remaining staff. He spoke plainly. He said mistakes had been made. He said stepping away without checking back had been one of his. He said from now on, injuries would mean rest, not pressure. Schedules would be fair. Voices would be heard. He didn't promise perfection. He promised presence. Some employees looked relieved. Others looked cautious. Trust, he knew, takes time. That afternoon, the waitress with the cast returned briefly, not to work, but to collect her things. Her hand was in a fresh wrap now, cleaner. Properly supported, she looked unsure as she stepped inside. The man greeted her with a smile. He asked how she was feeling. She said sore but hopeful. He told her job was safe. He told her to focus on healing. He told her she would be welcomed back when ready. Her eyes filled again. But this time, she didn't rush to hide it. She thanked him quietly. When she left, the staff watched her go in silence. Something had shifted. Over the next few days, changes came slowly, but they came. Extra help was hired. Breaks were enforced. The radio played a little louder. Laughter returned in small pieces. The man worked alongside everyone. He cooked. He cleaned. He listened. Customers noticed. They commented on the calmer pace, on the warmer smiles, on the way the diner felt like a place again, not just a stop. One evening, the waitress returned. Her cast was smaller now. She moved carefully, but with confidence. The man told her to take light duties. No heavy lifting. No rush, she nodded, grateful. As days turned into weeks, her hand healed. So did something else. The diner remembered who it was. The man never put his name back on the wall. He didn't need to. He stayed involved quietly, checking in, making sure care stayed part of the system. Sometimes he sat in the same booth by the window, drinking coffee, watching. But now, when he watched, he saw a balance. He had entered his diner as a stranger, but a broken hand reminded him why he built it in the first place. And this time, he stayed. The weeks after the changes did not feel perfect. They felt real. Some days were smooth. Other days were messy. Orders got mixed up. Someone called in sick. A delivery arrived late. But the difference was how those moments were handled. No shouting. No blame thrown across the room. Just people solving problems together. The man stayed involved without standing over anyone. He believed trust worked better when it was earned, not forced. He checked schedules, reviewed safety notes, and listened more than he spoke. The diner slowly found its rhythm again. The waitress came back full-time, once her hand healed enough. The cast was gone now, replaced by a light wrap. She still moved carefully. But there was strength in her steps that hadn't been there before. She laughed more, not loudly. Not all the time, but enough that others noticed. Customers noticed too. Some asked what had changed. Some said the place felt warmer. One regular said it reminded him of how it used to be years ago, though he couldn't explain why. The man smiled when he heard that. One afternoon, he sat in his usual booth by the window, the same one he chose the day he walked in as a stranger. The leather was still cracked. The table still worn, but the space around it felt lighter. The waitress brought him coffee without being asked. She didn't rush. She didn't apologize for nothing. He thanked her. She paused, then sat across from him for a moment. Just a moment. The diner was quiet between rushes. She told him she had been close to quitting before that day. She said she felt invisible. She said she thought pain was just part of working life. He listened. She said being sent home that night scared her at first. She thought it meant she was done. But then she realized it was the first time someone had told her to stop and take care of herself. The man nodded. He told her that places forget their purpose. When people stop listening, she asked why he came. In as a stranger. He took a breath and said, sometimes you learn the truth only when no one knows who you are. She understood. As months passed, the diner grew busier. Word spread, not through ads or signs, but through stories. About fair treatment. About kindness. About a place where workers were respected, new employees joined. They were trained differently, not just on how to serve food, but on how to speak to people. Mistakes were treated as lessons. The man never called himself a hero. He never told the story publicly. To him, this wasn't about rescue. It was about responsibility. One evening, long after closing, he stood alone in the diner again. The lights were low, chairs stacked, floors clean. He looked around and felt something settle, not pride, peace. He had learned something important. Stepping away does not mean letting go. Care needs checking. Values need guarding. He locked the door and walked into the quiet night. The diner glowed softly behind him, no longer just a business, but a place that remembered what it was built for. Time moved forward, the way it always does, quietly and without asking permission. The diner settled into its new way of being. Not perfect. Never perfect. But steady. Honest. Human. The man stopped coming every single day. Not because he stopped caring, but because he trusted what he now saw. He checked in often, sometimes announced, sometimes not. He wanted the place to stand on its own, without fear, without pretending.